And I had to check myself at some point, or rather, a good mentor of mine had to check me and say, at this point, is it your father or is it you? Thank you for tuning in to the Uncuffed podcast, episode 8. That is right, episode 8. We are going to be talking about reading the ingredients label. Now, if you don't know who I am or what this podcast is all about, my name is Uncuffed and I am a workplace consultant. This podcast is for leaders who are stressed out at home, maybe stressed out at work. They don't really know where to go. They don't really know who to go to for help. And they're just trying to figure out, how do I lead people and also lead my home at the same time? It's a struggle. It's not easy. I've dealt with this. The people who I've interviewed on this podcast have dealt with this. And this is definitely something that we want to help you with. So tune in, join in along with us on this journey. And hopefully you'll be able to find some relief and find some hope, because this podcast is all about life, leadership, and hope. I love to eat food. Absolutely love it. I especially love to eat junk food. And that's something that I'm really working on getting better at controlling. But one way that I can actually do that, help myself control it, is nothing crazy or extreme. It's simply doing this. It's reading the ingredients label on my favorite snacks. So, for example, if I want to grab a bag of Oreos, what I try to do now is I'll read the ingredients label, not to see how many calories are in it, because calories really don't matter in that grand scheme of things. It's the ingredients that matter. What are those preservatives that are going into the food? What are those sugars and all the gums that are going in that I know aren't really great for my body? Now, does this completely stop me from eating junk food? No, but it does help to mitigate in those moments where my desire for junk food is a little bit overwhelming. So what does that have to do with anything, right? What does that have to do with leadership or life or the idea of hope? Well, for leaders, and actually for anybody out there, a lot of the times we don't read the ingredients label on a lot of our actions. In fact, let's not even break it down to actions. Let's talk about our thoughts and our desires, right? A lot of the times, the things that we've put in our brain or the desires that we execute on, the combination of those things which become our behaviors, we don't check the ingredients label on those. I'll give you an example, right? Let's look at forgiveness, or the opposite of forgiveness, which is bitterness. What comes with bitterness? Loneliness, anxiety, depression, stress, worry, pain. I can give you an example in my life. I've talked about this before, but I had a really rocky relationship with my dad growing up. We had two different ideas of what a good father looks like, and to his credit, he did do what he knew to do. He didn't have a great example of a father from my paternal grandfather as well. So my dad literally was just working from an empty playbook. So because of that, there were a lot of gaps in how he treated me. There was a lot of anger that came with him. A lot of things that could really have damaged me as a kid, honestly, growing up, which it probably did, right? But for a little while as an adult, after I got married, after my wife and I had our first kid, and then right before we had our second kid, I had gotten to the point where I was like, I'm not dealing with this man anymore. He's never going to meet his grandkids. He's never going to do anything. I am done with him. And the crazy thing about it is, during the time when it was leading up to this point, whenever he would call me, I would start shaking, like my hands would start shaking. Mind you, it could have been an amicable conversation, but because I was holding on to so much bitterness in my heart because of the things that I thought he didn't do well, it created a lot of worry and anxiety in me. I mean, legitimately, my whole demeanor would change. And my wife would always be like, why are you answering the phone? Or why are you letting him control you like this? And I would always say, like, he's not controlling me. He's not doing this. But truth be told, the bitterness in my heart was controlling me, not him, right? And every time we had a conversation, even if it started out well, it would typically end in an argument. And I had to check myself at some point, or rather, a good mentor of mine had to check me and say, at this point, is it your father or is it you? Are you guys hearing that? It wasn't my father at that point. It was all me. I was the problem at that point because I had allowed that bitterness to fester so much in my heart that no matter what my dad did, no matter how good of a grandfather he could have been to my kids, no matter how good of a father he could have been to me at that time in my life, I refuse to actually let things go and forgive him. And it wasn't until one day when I was driving in the car and I was heading somewhere in Hedgesville, it might have been church actually, on an off day, but I heard audibly, I felt like I heard God say, your kids are my kids. Do not keep your kids away from your father. Your kids are my kids. Don't keep your kids away from your father. And I was like, okay, that's a strange thought because A, I wasn't even thinking about my dad at the time. And B, I was like, I don't know, Cannell. I think you're a little crazy right now. And it took a while. But eventually I listened to that voice and I invited my dad over to mine and my wife's house. And he came over and I was like, okay, God, if this was you saying this, have at it. Let me tell you guys, it was the coolest experience of my life because I watched my dad rolling on the floor with my kids. I saw my dad playing ping pong with my kids. I saw my dad doing all the things with my kids that I did not get as a kid. And whoa, what an impressive moment that was for my heart. That moment truly gave me some insight into what I was doing because A, I was disrupting a relationship between my father and my kids, which yes, some parents who are uber abusive and all that stuff, I don't know if I would bring my kids around them, but I was disrupting a chain of blessings from my kids because I was not letting them experience their grandfather. 2, I was disrupting a potential healing for my family. Because if I'm holding on to that bitterness against my dad, and now my kids are seeing that, now they're holding on bitterness for something they don't even understand. So I was literally becoming the cancer in that relationship. And it was just so crazy to be able to watch my dad be this amazing grandfather in that moment with my kids. And that's when I realized that I had to just let it go and forgive him. And I'm happy to say that I did. And now when my dad and I talk on the phone, I'm not shaking. There's no worry. There's no stress. It's not perfect. Let me just say that it's not perfect because we still have a lot of growing to do. I have a lot of growing to do, but I'm able to see my dad for who he can be. And let me just say, my daughter loves her grandfather. My son, he's 2, so he doesn't really get that concept, but he loves my dad. And it's just amazing to see that through obedience to God, I was given the opportunity to see that kind of healing happen in my family. And my kids are going to be blessed to have a relationship with their grandfather, which is amazing, right? Because I can tell you my relationship with my grandfather, who actually just recently passed away. He lived in Canada, so I hadn't really seen him since I was, I think, maybe 14 or 15 in person. No, actually, that's wrong. I saw him at my cousin's wedding after I got married as an adult. I apologize for that. But he would call me once a year or twice a year, and we would chit and chat. But when he died, because there wasn't that bond, the same bond that I had for, say, my grandmother, it was kind of just like a melancholy moment for me. I was sort of apathetic because I was like, okay, he was my grandfather, but I didn't really have that connection with him. And I thought it was weird. So I decided to text my cousins, actually. And I was like, hey guys, like, how are you guys feeling about grandpa passing away? And they were all like, well, it wasn't the same as grandma. I mean, we don't know. We're not feeling anything. And it was at that moment that I realized, oh my gosh, I am so appreciative of the blessing that my kids now have to have a deeper relationship with my dad, because I don't want my dad to pass away and my kids not feel sad about it. I don't want my dad to pass away and my kids just keep going about their day as if nothing happened, not really feeling the deep connection to him that I should have had with my grandfather. So if you are somebody that is carrying bitterness in your heart, read the ingredients label on that and say, okay, is it helping or is it hurting? What is that element or what is that additive in there that is potentially destroying my relationship, destroying my heart, destroying my peace? What is that thing stripping away all hope from my life? And really come to terms with that and say, is it worth it? You know, something else we might consider is unbridled anger, right? Anger feels good in the moment. It really does. But anger creates a loss of relationship. It creates loneliness. That's what the ingredients do. They create a loss of relationship and a loss and loneliness. So we need to observe those things and say to ourselves, is my unbridled anger worth it? Is being right all the time worth losing relationships? What about this? The need for control. That's right. So many of us have a need for control. I wouldn't say that I'm a controlling person. I'm probably far from it. But there are still some things in my life that I feel I deserve to be in control of. And you know what the need for control does? You know what the ingredients for that are? A loss of control, loneliness, anxiety, worry, sleeplessness, right? How many times have we or you lost sleep because you feel like you aren't in control of something, right? So that's something that we need to take a look at and observe and say, okay, this emotion or this desire, this thought may seem justified in this moment, but let me take a step back and let me read the ingredients label. Let me take a step back and say, okay, what's the outcome of this long term? Right? So let's even go a little bit deeper, because as a leader, this may be something you are dealing with right now. And I know that this is running rampant in our country right now in the US. The me first attitude. What does that lead to? Isolation, depression, the comparison game. Right? So all these things are negative ingredients, right? They're not producing anything good. So I am part of a morning men's group, and we were actually recently talking about Matthew 25. And in Matthew 25, there's a parable of the talents. So a master gave his 3 servants 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent in that order. So if you've ever heard that story, the idea through that story is that the master gives the talents and then he leaves for a while. And when he comes back, the person he gave 5 talents to doubled it and gave him back 10 talents. And talents are a weight of gold. I think it's 59 pounds is what we would consider it today. So that's a lot of money. The second person who had the 2 talents, he gave the master 4 back. So he doubled that money. And the one that got the one talent buried the money in the sand, in the dirt, and hid it away until the master came back. So let's think about that for a second. By the way, the master was very angry at the one that got the one talent, right? Because he said the least you could have done was invested it into the bank to gain interest. But let's take a look at this story a little bit deeper. It says the master went away for a long time. A long time. So that means there was enough time in that space for that person that buried the one talent to observe and correct their behavior, right? They could have observed the person with the 5 talents and said, oh, I wonder how they're making that money grow. Heck, they could have observed the person with the 2 talents who's one step above them and been like, I wonder what they're doing, because for some reason they're making the master more money. I should probably humble myself and ask them, how are you doing that? Or maybe even step back and just shadow them for a while, observe them for a while and see, okay, if I'm not producing anything good, but they are, what ingredients are they putting into their life? What are they consuming to help them produce more, to produce good? But instead of doing that, that servant didn't do that. So what did the master do? He took away that one talent and gave it to the person that had 10. He gave more responsibility to the person that had 10. So I say all that to say this. Are you taking the time to observe how your behaviors affect people long term? Or are you even taking the time to observe how other people's behaviors are what they're producing? Right? So often we get caught up in this world where we are only thinking about ourselves. We're only thinking about the things that we want to accomplish. We're only thinking about the things that we want to do. And we're not simply taking advantage of being able to observe what other people are doing. Read the ingredients label on your life. Read the ingredients label on other people's lives. Take the time to step back from whatever you're doing and observe how you are affecting the environment around you. Is it a positive change or is it a negative change? I mean, let's even look at this. Let's talk about work, right? If you're going into a job for an interview and you want to be able to get a job at a company, my recommendation to you would be to take time to observe how the employees of that company are moving, how they're working. Is the administrative assistant or head secretary or whoever is at the front desk, are they happy? Because if they're not happy, I'm sorry, nobody's happy. Does the leader seem to be rushing through the interview process? Do they seem to be trying to just move you through past things so that you can't observe what's really going on with the company? Are they willing to allow you to ask deeper questions so that you can uncover whether or not this is a place that is going to benefit you, and in turn, you can benefit them? Take a step back before you say, yes, I want this job. Or take a step back before you say, yes, I want this promotion. Because you never know what's going to come with that promotion, what kind of stress, what kind of negative thoughts might accompany that. You never know. So you always want to take a step back and observe. Read the ingredients label on those things. And talking about work, this podcast is actually sponsored by my company, Proceed to Lead, where I help business leaders navigate the ins and outs of their mission, their people, and their work. Those are the 3 most important things for any organization, because at the end of the day, all employees are volunteers. So if you master that idea and the concept that all employees are volunteers because they're trading their time for money and they can go anywhere they want to, then it puts a different spin on how you treat them. So if you want to find out more information, I have links in the description. Check out Proceed to Lead after this episode is over. My friends, The greatest weapon you have right now is patience. I know that sounds weird, but patience is actually something that God demonstrates throughout the entire Bible, right? He is patient and he is merciful. Patience. Literally, when Paul talks about what love is, he says love is patient and love is kind. Those are the first two things he says. There's a reason why that's there. It's because patience unlocks so many different things. We are so impatient. We're so quick to allow our thoughts and our desires and our emotions to take over and control the things that we do. And in that situation, we're not reading the ingredients label on it, right? If you have misplaced sexual desires, you're not reading the ingredients label on that, because that can lead to a lot of negative things for you and your family. Again, if you have anger, if you have a lot of worry, if you have a lot of stress, you're not reading the ingredients label on that. That stuff can affect not only your brain, but it can affect your body. So take a step back and observe the way things develop. Take a step back and observe how your behavior is affecting your family, your coworkers, your body, yourself, and choose something different. Because just like when I go to the store and I'm looking at groceries and I have the option of getting something healthy or something that's junk food, obviously most healthy things don't need an ingredients label because they are the sourced product. But it's the same thing. I'm taking the time to read the ingredients label and say, is this going to help my body in the long run? Yes, Oreos taste great. Chocolate chip cookies taste great. And I do still eat them. But the more I read the ingredients label, the less I'm apt to pick them up. So I want to encourage you to read the ingredients label. Pick up the things that you are doing and observe them. Read through them and tell me if they're worth it or not in the end. Because most of the time what we realize is that our rash judgments and our misplaced thoughts and our misplaced desires go down a road that we will find a hard time to recover from. But when we take the time to be patient and we observe and we read the outcomes from historical accounts, from the wiser, older people in our lives, we tend to see how shallow our understanding of the world really is. So my friends, go out there and impact the world. But start by impacting your heart and then impacting your family so that when you impact the world, it's real. A friend of mine once said, you don't want to be a success in the world and a failure at home. It starts at home and it starts with you. So thank you for listening to episode 8 of the Uncuffed podcast. And before I go, make sure you like and subscribe to this podcast. It's something that I'm doing from the heart, and I really want to help leaders out there really navigate the ins and outs of the world. And so many of us are dealing with stress that we can't even describe to people. So I'm here for you, and I want to know what's going on in your life. I am Uncuffed, your host, and I will see you next time.